and then the win is so close. Imagine how terrible you would feel if you played King d7 or King d8 and your opponent looked at you and said stalemate. It's over. When the victory is as close as it can get, you can still throw it away. Always be careful. Correct move is just King d6, and then after you play King c8, Queen c7 is checkmate. No problem. So the technique, and you can figure this out logically, you don't have to memorize the moves. The technique is to keep on checking him or pinning him, force the king in front of the pawn, and then bring your king one step closer. The technique is exactly the same for d or e pawns. Just to look quickly, if the pawn was on d7, you could check him. The king moves, you force him in front, you bring your king closer, he moves, you pin him, check him. It's a normal pattern. You force the king in front again. Notice again, I didn't stalemate him. This would be stalemate. Be careful. He moves, and now, of course, white has no threat. He can't queen because he's pinned. You just bring the king over. The king has to go this way because this would be checkmate. King moves away, and you take the pawn, and mate quickly follows. Now, why do you think it is that a bishop pawn is drawing? This is one of the interesting paradoxes of chess. If you have a queen against the bishop pawn, there's no way to stop him from pushing the pawn without stalemating him. Why? Let's take a look. You check him like you always do. He moves away. He's threatening a queen. You check him again. He moves away. You check him again. Okay, he moves. You stop him from queening. He defends his pawn. And now when we reach the critical moment, after you check him, notice in all other positions he was forced to defend his pawn from in front. But now the key difference is that he can go to the corner, still threatening the queen, and after you take it, it's stalemate. King is stuck in the corner. And this is why the theory of king and pawn against king and queen, the bishop pawn, is drawing. Now notice, of course, that if white were to have had an extra pawn on a2, then it would be winning. Because after you check him, if he goes to the corner, then you could take the pawn, because this pawn could move. So we're talking about only one pawn. Often it can be to the defender's disadvantage to have extra pawns on the board, because it gets in the way of stalemate. Why is the rook pawn drawn? That's a little more obvious. You check him, he moves, you try to defend, and then when you give him that final check to try to force him in front of the pawn, he just goes there. You don't have the time to bring your king in, because that would be stalemate once more. So now we see the theory of king and queen against king and pawn. Let's return to that final position I had against Lputian. After I played queen c5 check, he resigned. Why? Because it's a knight pawn, first of all, so we know I'm winning. So when he moves in front of his b pawn, if I want to, I can just take his a pawn. Although there's no need, I can just bring my king. As a final review, if you have a king and queen against a king and pawn, this position is drawn, the rook pawn. This position is winning, because you can force the king over. This position, once more, is drawn. The black king can't come closer, because in the critical moment, the king can move to the corner, and you can't take the pawn because of stalemate. This position, once more, is winning. You force the king in front of the pawn. Similarly, this position is winning. You can force the king in front of the pawn, step by step, bring your king closer. The bishop pawn, the same on either side, drawn. The king can go to the corner. The rook pawn, also drawn. The king can go to the corner. You can't make any progress. And that's the theory of king and queen against king and pawn. Keep that in mind in your calculations. Now that you know the basic rules of king and queen against king and pawn, I have to tell you a couple exceptions to keep your eye out for. First of all, a lot of the time these endgames come about when there are races and one side queens right before the other one. For example, if it's black to move here, h4, a5, h3, a6, h2, a7. Now black queens right before white defends the queening square, and it seems like, yes, it's a rook pawn and so it should be a draw, because of what I just told you. But this position is winning for black. If the queen can ever occupy the queening square, it's over. Winning. The only way this would be a draw is if the white king could come to b8. This is a draw. But in this position, after queen a8, it's all over. King defends, and step by step the black king comes in, forces the king back, you take the pawn, and you win the game. The exact same thing can be said about bishop pawns. This position, white to move, is winning for black. King b6, queen c8, over. You occupy it, the king comes in. But after king d7, now this is a draw because of the stalemate that we saw. Always look out for the exceptions. Don't just be dogmatic when you know a rule. Know the principles, and then check it for yourself. There are a lot of exceptions in chess.